Happy New Year, friends! To kick off another year of crafting, I put together a video of 12 of my favorite crafts, one for each month, as inspiration for a brand new year. This is always so fun for me. I love looking back on past projects, and I'm really excited to get started on some new ones for 2025. If you have a mantle or a coffee bar or bookshelf that you like to create a hanging garland for on the front, I'll show you how you can make a quick one with just a pack of these wooden snowflakes and some cardstock. A standard piece of cardstock measures 8.5 by 11 inches. I knew I could get 4 banner shapes out of one piece by cutting it in half in both directions, so I cut it in half long ways at 4.25 and then in half again the other way at 5.5. Now, a really simple way to create a banner shape is to measure up 1 inch from the bottom and put a dot right in the center of your banner. So since my banner was 4.25 inches across, I measured up 1 inch and I placed a dot at 2 1/8 inches. Then I just used my scissor to cut straight up to that dot. And once I had that slit cut, then I just cut from one corner up to the center and from the other corner up to the center again. Now, using a standard hole punch here, I'm just punching a hole in each corner of my cardstock, and now I have my banner shape. So I'll show you again here. To create this banner shape, I just measured up 1 inch to the center of my piece, which was at 2 1/8 inch. I cut a slip up to that dot, and then I cut again from each corner up to the center, and that creates my banner shape on the bottom. I really liked that aged look, so I'm using some Distress ink by Tim Holtz and an ink blending tool to go around the edges of each of my banners. Now, depending on where you're putting your garland, it will depend on how many banners you created. Like I mentioned before, you can get 4 out of one piece of cardstock, but I knew I would be better off making 6. That would fit better across my mantle. So I did make 6 banners for mine, and you can see the difference here between having just the banner and then that little bit of Distress ink that goes around the edges. Now, if the rustic look isn't really your thing, then just skip this step and make a banner. I chose not to paint my snowflakes because I really like how the wood looks up against the craft colored cardstock. And keep that in mind too, depending on what your decor style is, you can paint the snowflakes if you want, you can stain them, and you can switch out the color of cardstock that you use too to match your home's decor. Now, I'm using some hot glue here just to hot glue that snowflake down in the center of my banner. And in order to hide the hole that's at the top of each of these snowflakes, I'm just using a sticky back gem and placing it over that hole. And keep in mind also, you don't have to use snowflakes here at all. There's so many different wooden shapes available at the Dollar Tree that you could pick any of them, and I think they would all make a really cute garland. I was just really excited to use up these snowflakes because this is something I can put up for Christmas and then I can leave up afterwards until winter is over. I'm using some white macrame cord that I got from Amazon to string all of my banner pieces onto. I didn't want to see the cord from the front, so I made sure that starting on the right side of my banner, I strung the cord down through the top and then back up through the bottom on the left-hand side. So you can see here, as I'm stringing it on, it's keeping that cord along the back side of the banner and you're not seeing it from the front. One thing I want to mention, if you decide to use something other than macrame cord to string your banner pieces onto, just make sure that whatever you use to punch a hole in each of your banners, that whatever you're using will fit through the hole. So I used a standard size hole punch here because I knew that cord would fit through, but if I was using something thicker like ribbon or a chunky yarn, I would probably move up to a small circle paper punch instead. I thought this set of heart-shaped rings from the Dollar Tree were so unique, and I was really excited to create a project with them. In addition to these rings, I'm also going to be using some of these glitter heart flower picks and a big variety of Valentine's ribbons that I had in my stash. Some are just red, some are pink, some are white, all different colors that represent Valentine's Day. These rings come separate in the pack, so potentially you could make 3 different projects with one pack of these heart-shaped rings, but I wanted my rings to be connected. So I took some craft sticks. These are just the regular tongue depressor size. I cut them down, and you can see here that I have my rings spaced out pretty evenly, and I also have it on my silicone mat because I knew a lot of that hot glue would seep through. So I just placed a little bit of hot glue on each of the rings, and I placed a piece of the craft stick over it. I repeated that 2 more times so that I had 3 different points that would join the rings together to make it a bit more secure. Once I had those 3 pieces of craft stick in place, I then flipped the whole thing over, and on the other side I added more hot glue and I placed 3 more sticks so that I had a nice secure connection on both sides. Next, I got to work creating some scrappy bows for on my heart. If you've never made a scrappy bow before, they're really fun and they're really easy. I'm using one of the craft sticks here for reference, so I knew how long to cut my pieces. And you can see I'm starting here with this red burlap type ribbon, and I cut 2 lengths a little bit longer than that craft stick, and I also dovetailed the ends. I made my way down from my widest ribbons to my most narrow ribbons, and on the wider pieces, I did go ahead and dovetail all of the ends. On some of the more narrow ribbons, I just cut the ends at a slant, and some of these aren't even ribbons. I have some different types of trim here too. The more variety of colors and textures that you can add to these scrappy bows, the cuter they are. Once I had a good pile of ribbons in place, then I could start assembling my bow. I started again with some of the wider ribbons, and I just laid them in an X pattern, and I kept laying them on top of each other, and I tried to make sure that not only was I varying the sizes and textures of the ribbon, but I was also making sure that I was not placing 2 of the same colors on top of each other. So you can see here, I started with a pink, and then I went to red, and then another pink, and now I'm at a white. So just keep layering your ribbons from widest to narrow. Vary the textures and vary the color, and it'll make a really cute bow. Once you have all of your ribbons in place, then you can take another piece of thinner ribbon or even a piece of jute. You could use a zip tie here, and you just want to place it over the middle of the X, scrunch it all together, and tie it in a knot. I only created 2 bows for my heart rings, but depending on how far apart you spaced your craft sticks, you may want to create a few more. Now, because I had tied my bow together with those thinner ribbons, I kept the tails on those thinner ribbons longer so that I could help attach it to my rings. I placed the little hot glue on the top craft stick, and then with those 2 thinner ribbons, I brought it around to the back side, and I just gave it a tie to make it really secure. Once I had those ends tied in place, I did add another dab of hot glue, and I secured everything with a piece of clear tape. It's up to you how you want to decorate this the rest of the way, but since I already had these glitter heart picks on hand, I figured they would look really cute on the bow and in between the 2 bows to cover up that other craft stick. It was really easy to just pull that pick out of the center of the heart, and then I just used some hot glue. I added 1 to each of my bows and 1 in between. I kept the hanger for this heart ring set really simple. I just cut another piece of that thin red ribbon. I looped it through the very top heart ring and did a slip knot, and then I created a little knot on the other end so that I would have a way to hang it. Now that spring is here, I'm really inspired to add more greenery and florals to my home decor, and these planters are a perfect way to do that. From the Dollar Tree, I grabbed 2 packs of these bamboo rings. There's 2 different sizes in here. I'm only going to use the smaller one today, but with both packs, you could make 2 different size planters. I'm also using a pack of the craft sticks from the Dollar Tree, and I'm going to use a few wooden beads that I already have on hand to act as feet. I wanted to create a base for my bottom ring first. I could have used cardboard here or chipboard or anything just to be able to set a plant on, but I thought since I had this whole pack of craft sticks, I may as well use them up. And the craft sticks were a perfect fit. They fit exactly across the center of these smaller rings. So I just started gluing around the edges of the ring. I started laying my craft sticks on. You can see the one in the middle there. It fit just perfectly from end to end. And then as I worked my way down to one end, it started to overlap, and that was okay because after I had all of the craft sticks on, I went through with my utility knife and just started cutting off the excess. These craft sticks are pretty thin that you get from the Dollar Tree, so it was pretty easy to cut through these. And I always find that it's easier to make a few light passes rather than trying to cut through the whole stick at once. So I'm just taking my utility knife here and I'm making a few passes just to get the excess off. And remember, this is the bottom of the planter. You're not actually going to be able to see it. I just thought this was a neat way to use up some craft sticks rather than cutting a piece of cardboard. After all the excess was cut off, I did go through with a sanding block and just remove any sharp edges just to make sure that I didn't get any splinters. When I need to cut a bunch of craft sticks down to the same length, I always like to use my paper trimmer. So I'm using those same craft sticks from the Dollar Tree. I'm cutting the rounded edge off of one side, and then I'm just measuring out 5 inches and cutting it again so that my planter will be 5 inches tall. Putting this plant holder together was really simple. I just started adding hot glue to the base piece that I had created on the outside of the ring, and I just lined my craft stick up. You can see I have my silicone mat here. This just helps protect my work surface, and it also helps make sure that I can line up the bottom of the craft stick with the bottom of the ring. Once I had a few rings in place, then I went through and I hot glued the other end to the second ring so that I could space these out a little bit more evenly. Once I had a few of the craft sticks hot glued onto one side of my plant holder, I jumped over to the other side because I noticed that it had started to droop, so this just made it a little bit easier to keep it even on both sides. So I'm doing the same thing on this second side here. I'm just adding hot glue to the bottom ring and the top ring, and I'm holding my craft stick in place there. I kept my craft sticks fairly close together. That's the main difference between this one and the one on the Kirkland's website. The Kirkland's ones, the vertical pieces were a little bit farther apart, so it's up to you how you decide to do yours. But I like the look of mine with the craft sticks a little bit closer together. Here's where you can decide what will fit your home's decor the best. For me, I really like the look of the natural wood, but I also like that distressed look. So I'm taking some white chalk paint here and I'm just dry brushing over the surface, leaving some of that wood show through. You could buy fancier feet for your plant stand, but I'm all about using up what I already have. And since I already had these white wooden beads on hand, I just hot glued these to the bottom. I'm really glad the Dollar Tree started carrying these pom-pom makers. You can get a pack of 2 to make 2 smaller pom-poms, or you can get a single one in a pack that makes a larger pom-pom. I'm going to be using the larger one for this wreath, and I know the Dollar Tree does carry yarn from time to time also, but I picked my yarn up from Michael's and Walmart. You can see here I have pink and white. I also grabbed one of these bunny ear headbands from the Dollar Tree. I just needed the ears from that. And I do have one of these wooden rings from the Dollar Tree. If you can't find one of these at your store, don't worry, you can make the base out of cardboard instead. If you've never used one of these pom-pom makers before, it's pretty simple. You can see here that both of the sides flap out, and it is 2 sections. It's connected in the center by a pin. What you want to do is open up one side of the pom-pom maker, and starting towards the center, just take whatever yarn color you're using and just start wrapping it from the center towards the outside. You can go back and forth and wrap it as many times as you want until you have it nice and full on one side. As you're wrapping back and forth to fill in all the spaces, once you have it nice and full, just make sure that you end towards the outside of the pom-pom maker. So keep the string on that end and then just close that flap over, and then that leaves your string in a good position to start on the next side. So go right from the side, you don't have to cut it off or anything, and just repeat the same process, working from the outside to the inside and back and forth until you have the second side as full as you like it. I wanted my pom-poms to be pretty thick and fluffy, so I made sure that I added quite a few layers of yarn to the pom-pom maker as I was wrapping back and forth. And I also wanted to share with you that if you don't feel like making all of these pom-poms, they do sell craft kits at the Dollar Tree that contain pom-poms. They looked a little thin to me, but I think you could make it work for this wreath also. And just like on the first side, when you're done wrapping the second side, you want to make sure that your ending piece is on the outside of the pom-pom maker. And again, you can clip it off after you've closed the flap. I think it just makes it a little bit easier. So you can see both sides of our pom-pom maker are nice and full with yarn now. And here's where you need a pretty sharp pair of scissors. There's a slight channel that runs through the center of the pom-pom maker, and you want to be able to slide your scissor blade into that channel so that you can start cutting all of the yarn that you wrapped away from the center of the pom-pom maker. Just make sure you have a little bit of a grip on the maker itself so that the sides don't flip open as you're cutting. But you can see, because there is that channel through the center, it makes it nice and easy to cut through all of the yarn. And then you just want to repeat that on the second side also. Just slide your scissor blade into the center of that channel and then just start snipping away. If you have a lot of yarn on your pom-pom like I do, you can cut it in layers until you get down towards the center of the channel. Now, once you have all of the yarn cut away from the center, you just need to take another piece of the same color yarn and make sure it's long enough that whatever you're going to tie this onto, you have some extra length there, that you have some tails that you'll be able to tie it on. So now you can see here, you just need to slip that yarn right through that center channel. It'll go through both sides of the pom-pom maker. And once you have all of that string lined up through that center channel, you just want to knot it a few times. I usually just gave mine 2 ties. That was enough to hold everything together. Pull it fairly tight so that you can cinch all of those pieces of yarn that are already attached to the pom-pom maker together, and it'll create a nice fluffy pom-pom. Once you have both knots in place on your pom-pom maker, the last thing you need to do is open up both of those arms again, fold them out to the outside, and then, like I mentioned earlier, there is a pin on the inside of the pom-pom maker that's holding the 2 sides together. So you just want to gently pull that apart and your pom-pom will pop right out of the center. You might have a few extra long pieces here and there, and that's okay. Just take your scissors and give it a little bit of a trim so that all of the edges of your pom-pom are nice and even. And then, like I said, because we left that string nice and long, now we have a nice long set of tails that will be able to tie this pom-pom onto our wreath. After I had several pom-poms made, I started tying them onto my wreath form. Now you can choose to do this however you'd like. You can do all one color. I'm using 2 colors here, but you can use as many colors as you'd like. And you can do it in any pattern that you'd like to. I decided to go with 2 of each color around my wreath. So you can see here, I tied on 2 of the white ones to start. Once I had them tied on, then I went through and I had just added a little dot of hot glue to the underside of my pom-pom just to make sure that it wouldn't slide around on my wreath form. And like I mentioned before, if you don't have one of these wooden wreath forms, you could easily just make a ring out of cardboard. I would probably just cut 2 rings of the same size though and glue those 2 rings together just to make it a bit more sturdy. So once I had my 2 white pom-poms on, then I just repeated the same thing with 2 of the pink pom-poms, and I went the whole way around the outside of the wreath form. And when I got to the end, I did have to add a 3rd white pom-pom to the 2 that I started with, but that was okay because I just used that as the top of my wreath. And if you're curious, I did need 19 pom-poms altogether to fill up my wreath. Now for the bunny headband, the bunny ears have a piece of plastic running up through them that's connected to the headband, but it's pretty easy to snap off. So I just started by cutting the fur away first, and then I bent the bunny ear back and forth until it broke that piece of plastic. I'm going to leave that plastic in there though, just to make the ear stand up a bit better. So once I had the bunny ear taken off of the headband, I just used a little bit of hot glue to cinch the bottom together so that that plastic piece wouldn't fall apart. And then you can see here with the second ear, it was actually easier to break the plastic piece first. And then I was able to go back through, cut the ear off, and then use hot glue again to seal the end shut. I thought I would be able to just hot glue the bunny ears right to the top of my wreath, but it felt a little shaky to me, like it wasn't quite sturdy enough. So I did add hot glue right to the top of the wreath, and you can see I put the bunny ear right on top of it, but because it still felt loose to me, I flipped it over on the back, and then I just used a piece of a craft stick, and I use that as a bridge between the backside of the bunny ear and the backside of the wreath, and it made that bunny ear stand up a little bit better, and it added a little more security to the backside of my wreath. The peel and stick wallpaper really comes in handy when you don't have a ton of time to craft. From the plus section of my Dollar Tree, I grabbed a 2-pack of these 11 by 14 stretched canvases. I'm only going to use one for today's project, so I'll save the other one for something else. I also went over to the Crafter Square section and I got one of their regular 8 by 10 stretch canvases. And then in my stash, I had this wooden letter M. I think this might have came from Walmart, but it might have come from Michael's. I'm not sure. And it's about 5 inches high. I chose the letter M because that's what my last name starts with, but you could use anything you'd like, or you don't even have to use a letter at all. You could put whatever you want in the center of your pictures. For my letter M, I just gave it 2 quick coats of white chalk paint. While my paint was drying, I cut my peel and stick wallpaper down so that I had 2 pieces, one that was 1 inch smaller than the smaller canvas. So for example, my 8 by 10 canvas, I cut that piece of wallpaper down to 7 by 9. And for the 11 by 14 canvas, I cut that piece down to 10 by 13. Now the backside of this wallpaper is pretty sticky, but I really wanted to make sure that it would stick well to this canvas material because of the coating that's on it. I wasn't sure how well that adhesive would hold up. So once I had my piece of wallpaper centered within my canvas, I'm using my art glitter glue here on the backside just to make sure that it was more sticky. Once I had it in place, I flipped it over and burnished it down with my hand just to make sure that that glue had a chance to set and sink in. And it's easier to push it from the back side than from the front side because of how the canvas is stretched across the frame. So you can see here again with the bigger canvas, I'm doing the same thing. I just laid my peel and stick wallpaper on top of it and made sure that it was centered within the canvas. Then I lifted half of it up, added some of my art glitter glue to one side, laid the paper down, put a little more art glitter glue on the other side, and then I flipped the whole thing over to really give it a good press to make sure that that glue was nice and adhered down. Now that my paint is all dry, I'm just going to use hot glue to put everything together. So I put a generous amount on the back side of my letter M. I centered it within the smaller of the 2 canvases, and again I made sure that I flipped it over and pressed it from the back side so that it would have a chance to set in place. And I think that looks pretty just how it is, but I think stacking the 2 canvases together really elevated the look a bit. So again, on the smaller canvas, I'm adding hot glue to the back side of the smaller one, and then I centered it within the bigger one. And once I had it centered, I flipped the whole thing over so that I could give it a press from the back side so that I wasn't putting any pressure on that canvas material. And like I said, you don't have to add a monogram to yours. I think another pretty option would be to create a small wreath and put that in the middle. I had searched through all of the plastic planters that they had at the Dollar Tree, but I couldn't really find one that I really liked the shape. So over in the bathroom section, I ended up finding this plastic garbage can, and it was perfect for what I needed. You can see here, it's about 8.5 inches tall, and it really doesn't get much wider at the top than it is at the bottom. I'm also going to be using one of these sand dollars from the Dollar Tree and some nautical rope. About 1.5 inches up from the bottom of my garbage can, I took a nail file and I just roughed up the surface a bit. This plastic's pretty shiny and I was afraid that my hot glue wouldn't stick very well to it. I laid down just a small amount of hot glue, and that's where I started my nautical rope. I wasn't sure exactly how much rope was in this roll, and my initial idea was that I was just going to wrap until I ran out of rope, but as I was wrapping, I realized I had way more rope than what I realized, so I just kept wrapping until I had a few inches built up, just so that it was taller than the sand dollar that I was using. Once I had all of my rope in place, and I was really careful to make sure that I was stacking the rope on top of each other, there wasn't any gap in between each of the rows. But once I got to the height that I like, I grabbed that nail file again and I gave it another little roughing so that my hot glue would stick. And I did lay hot glue down for the last 2 rows just to make sure that everything would be held in place really well. I also made sure that where I ended my row was where I started it, so that that could be the backside of my planter. I debated which way I wanted my sand dollar to face. The one side kind of made more sense because it bubbled out a bit, but the other side had a lot more detail on it, so I decided to stick that side facing outward. I used that nail file again to rough up the surface just to make sure my glue would stick, because I wasn't sure if this was plastic or plaster. Next, I had to switch camera angles here so that you could see a little bit better. Here's my finished planter. You can see it's quite big and quite deep. So I grabbed some river rock. I always get these from the Dollar Tree, and I placed a good amount in the bottom just to make it a little bit more sturdy and secure. And then I also had a piece of floral foam that I cut to fit inside of my planter. I laid that on top, and then I have this really big bunch of leaves. I think these are Monstera leaves. And I went back and forth. I wasn't sure how many of these leaves would look good in this planter. I originally clipped off 3 and stuck those in. Then I added another 2, and I realized that looked a little messy and overcrowded. So then I went back to just the 3 leaves. It's really up to you. I also think that some of that breezy pampas grass would look really pretty in a planter like this. And then once I had my leaves in place, I used the rest of the river rock and I placed it over the top just to cover up the floral foam. Watermelon is one of my favorite summer fruits, and I love all of the watermelon items they have at the Dollar Tree. I wanted to make a picnic caddy because my family gets together a lot over the summer, so I grabbed one of the watermelon themed charger plates they have, and I also grabbed 3 of these coordinating glasses. I love the red color on them, and I really like the iridescent finish they have to them. Even though these glasses are pretty just how they are, I really wanted to lean into the watermelon theme. I started with some white chalk paint and I went about 1/3 of the way up the glass, or right where it started to curve. And I'm using this white chalk paint for part of my watermelon design, but I'm also using it as a primer because sometimes paint gets a little bit sheer and I want it to be more opaque on this glass. So I am going to go in with some other colors, but I figured I would start with the white first to act as a base. I went around the outside of the glass, and you can see here I wasn't trying to create a straight line. I wanted it to flow a little bit better around the outside of the glass. So there are some wiggles and some lumps and bumps, but I feel like it just made it look more like a watermelon. I gave each of my glasses 2 coats of the white chalk paint, and after it was all dry, I went in with some green. I'm using the apple barrel paint here in a matte finish, and this one is called Arbor Green. Now I'm going to try my best to follow the same wiggle bumpy pattern that I did on the white coat, but I'm staying about 1/8 of an inch down from the top. So the white is going to act as the rind of the watermelon, and now I'm painting on my dark green color. So you can see here, I'm just following the line as best as I can. It doesn't have to be perfect because no watermelon is. And for all of the paints that I did have to do 2 coats. So like I said, I gave it 2 coats of the white paint, and then once my first coat of the green was in, I realized it looked a little streaky, which is okay because watermelon tends to be a little streaky, but I wanted more of a coverage, so I did go through with the same dark green and gave it a second coat. And like I said, I'm doing the same thing to all 3 of the glasses. You can see here after my second coat of green dried, you could see some of the white through it, which I felt gave it more of a realistic look. Then to create some of the lines in the watermelon, I went in with a lighter green color. This is also by Apple Barrel in a matte finish, and it's called Crisp Green. I have a really flat paintbrush here, and I'm just dabbing it into that lighter green color, and I'm just pouncing it onto the bottom of my glass to create the stripes that a watermelon would naturally have. Now on the camera here, it looks a bit bright, but when the paint was all dry, that green did dull down a bit, and it made it look more realistic. So you can see here, I did all 3 of my glasses like that, and since I've been handling them, they have some of the oils from my fingers on them. So before I went on to the next step, I just used some rubbing alcohol to remove all of their oils. Now I took my Sharpie paint pen in black, and I wanted to create a few seeds on my glass, so just doing a teardrop shape in different spots around the glass. I didn't try to do a pattern here. I was just making them as random as I could, and I turned them in different directions, and I spaced them out uneven so it would look more like a watermelon. I went about another third up of the glass. I didn't want to fill in the whole red section with seeds, but I did want there to be a few on there to look like a real watermelon. After my paint was dry on all 3 of the glasses, I laid them out in the center of my plate, and I wanted to use some E6000 here so that I would have a really strong bond between the 2 plastics. I also used some hot glue just to have that short-term hold. So I went around where the raised part of the glass was, where I knew it would touch the plate, and that's where I'm putting my E6000. And then right in the very center of the glass is where I added my hot glue just so that it would have a quick hold. Then I placed everything back down on the charger plate so that it was in the center. I found these cute watermelon napkins at the Dollar Tree, and they also had packs of plasticware in a dark green and a light green that matched perfect. I saw this over-the-door wreath hanger at the Dollar Tree with the sunflowers at the top, so I knew I wanted to make a wreath to hang from it. Now, when I create wreaths, I like to pick out things that kind of do some of the work for me. So I found these flower picks at the Dollar Tree that have a lot of different elements on them. You can see they have the mini sunflowers and some wheatgrass and some other leaves and things like that. So I don't have to worry about arranging the flowers myself. I also picked up one of these beaded wreath forms. The beads are already on a wire, so that job is already done for me. Then I dug around in my stash and I found some sunflower ribbon. Now I can't quite remember where I got this from. If I can find it on Amazon, I'll link it below, but I'm not really sure if that's where I got it from. I felt that the stem on these floral picks was just a bit too long for the wreath form that I'm using, so I just took a pair of wire cutters and I cut about 1.5 inches off the bottom of each of the floral picks so that they would fit across the bottom of my wreath form a little bit better. I also made sure to bend the bottom stems a bit so that it would fit the curve of the wreath that I'm using. If I'm able to, I'd rather not glue anything onto certain wreath forms so that I can reuse them later. So for this wreath, I'm using zip ties, and you can see I just laid my 2 floral picks right over where that metal clasp was on this wreath form. And I find it's easier if I put one zip tie on and don't tighten it the whole way down. And then I add my second zip tie, and once I have that one in place, then I go back through and tighten them both down. That just helps keep everything from sliding around and make sure that it's in the right spot. I did notice while I was at the Dollar Tree that they had some pre-made bows with a sunflower print on them, but since I already had this ribbon in my stash, I figured I would just make my own. So this bow is going to be pretty simple. I just cut 3 lengths of the ribbon, and I'm using 2 of them to form my loops. You can see I just folded them both over on themselves. And then I take a piece of jute twine and I cinch them both together and tie it with the jute twine. Once I have both of those loops tied together, then I go through and I tie the tails on separate. I know a lot of people will just cinch all 3 pieces together, but for me, it's a little bit easier if I do it in 2 separate sections. I don't know why, I just always feel like my tails lay a little bit better that way. Once I had the bow how I liked it, I made sure that I dovetailed both of the ends of the ribbon, and then to attach it to my wreath form, I did use a little bit of hot glue, but just on the flower stems. I made sure that I didn't get any on those wooden beads so that I could reuse this wreath. And because I used that jute cord to tie all of my ribbons together, I left the tails long enough that once that glue had a chance to set a bit, I flipped it over and I was able to use that jute cord just to tie it on and make sure that it was nice and secure. Now, because I have that nice wreath hanger from the Dollar Tree, I didn't add a hanger to the top of this wreath. And as a final touch for my bow, instead of adding a center loop like you see in the Dollar Tree picture, I decided just to add a little bit more sunflowers. So I took a sunflower from another floral pick and a leaf, and I glued that right to the center of my bow. One of my favorite things to create is a garland to hang across the front of my fireplace. Now I'm showing you some burlap flowers here and some little paper sunflowers, but I'm actually not going to use any of those in this. I kind of switched gears halfway through. But you will need some sort of nautical rope. I have a roll here from the Dollar Tree. I also have a few ribbons that I found at the Dollar Tree. And I am going to be using some wider burlap ribbon. I got this at Michael's. They don't usually carry anything like this at the Dollar Tree, but I really like this burlap because it has a finer weave and it's serged on both sides, so it tends not to unravel so easily. For my garland, I wanted to create some pennants and I wanted them to be made of this burlap, but I found in the past when I've used burlap like that, it tends to curl up. So in order to make sure that it doesn't curl up once I cut it out, I'm using some regular cardboard here. This is just an old Amazon box, and I laid the ribbon over it, and I'm cutting a piece of cardboard that is not quite as wide as my ribbon. So I laid my ribbon down and I made sure it overlapped the bottom of that cardboard, and then I just cut a piece out that was narrower than my ribbon. You can see it has about a 1/4 inch on each side. Now to get started creating the pennant shapes, I have my cutting mat down here. So I'm starting across the bottom and I'm just marking every 3 inches. So with my pencil here, you can see I went from the bottom corner and I went over to that first mark 3 inches, and I marked 3 inches the whole way across. Then on the opposite side, I'm starting about 1.5 inches in, and I created another pencil mark, and then from that 1.5 inches I went another 3 inches. The reason I'm going in 1.5 inches before I mark my 3-inch marks is because I want to create that pennant shape. So since I'm doing a 3-inch base on my pennants, I wanted to cut that in half by 1.5 inches, and that's going to give me my center point. So you can see now that all of my pencil marks are in place, I'm switching to a marker here so you can see a little bit better. I'm just connecting all of those lines. So across the bottom where I had those 3-inch marks, I just drew a line up to that first 1.5 inch mark. And then from there, I'm able to connect all of the lines and dots that I created. And this is going to give me my pennant shape. So you see every time I create a line, I have pennants going across the bottom and then across the top also. And because this is cardboard, it's super easy to just cut out using a utility knife. You can see I'm just laying my ruler down and going through it a few times, and it's cutting that off. So once I have that first little wedge cut off, now I'm in all of my pennant shapes. And depending on what length of cardboard you use will depend on how many you can go the whole way across. So just keep that in mind anytime you need to create these pennant shapes. Whatever width you're using for the base of yours, like I said, I'm doing a 3-inch width, so my point is going to be at the 1.5-inch mark. So whatever your base is, just divide that in half, and that's where you know you need to start your second set of marks. Now that I have my cardboard all cut out, I have my piece of burlap ribbon here, and I'm using my silicone mat because this is burlap. It could seep through a bit, so I'm running a fine line of hot glue across the top of one of my triangles, and I'm laying that on the very edge of my burlap. Now, like I said before, this burlap ribbon from Michaels, both ends of the burlap are serged so that it has a nice place that you can set this cardboard down, and a lot of that glue will stay in place, but like I said, just be careful because sometimes it does ooze out. And I'm just repeating that the whole way down. I think I chose to do 6 pennants for my garland, so I'm only laying 6 triangles on mine. But depending on how long you want your garland to be, you can create as many as you want. And you can see here, I'm also leaving about 3/4 of an inch space in between each of my triangles so that I have room to cut everything out. Once it's all glued out, then I'm going through with a really sharp pair of scissors and I'm just cutting up both sides of my cardboard. And now my burlap is in place on that cardboard and it has this nice banner shape. And again, because we left about 3/4 of an inch in between each of the triangles, I'm able to just cut up through on both sides and I have enough space to create my little pennants. As I mentioned before, I'm not using any of the sunflowers that I first showed you. I do want to glue a sunflower in the center of each of these triangles, but the orange ones that I showed were too big and the little paper ones are too small, but I did have another set that fit just right. So I laid a little hot glue under the burlap on that cardboard, and then I used a more hot glue on top so that I could glue a sunflower in the center of my triangle. And like I said before, in the past, when I've made different types of garlands and banners with burlap, it seems that after I hang it, I don't know if it's the moisture in the air or what it is, but the fabric tends to curl and it doesn't stay in place. So that's why I wanted to use the cardboard behind it. Since it's the same color as the burlap, you really can't see that it's there. But because we glued that burlap to the cardboard, it'll keep a nice triangle shape now. So I just went through on each of my triangles and glued a sunflower to the center. I also wanted to add a second element to my garland. So I'm using some ribbon from the Dollar Tree. You can see the one is a really pretty blue color with sunflowers on it, and the other one is just an orange, and they both have this metallic gold edging on it, which I think is so pretty. So I wanted to prep some of these ribbons before I start assembling my garland. I cut a 12-inch length of each of the ribbons. And on the end of each of the ribbons, I cut it to a slant. So for the blue ribbon, I cut it from the left side going up, and for the orange ribbon, I cut it from the right side going down. That way, when they faced each other, they were facing in opposite directions. And the reason I did that is because I wanted them to flow a little bit different from each other. And I also felt that this ribbon was too narrow to cut a dovetail into, so that's why I just created a slant on each of them. Now I'm ready to add everything to my nautical rope. So I'm starting with one of my triangles first, and I just laid a bead of hot glue across the top on the cardboard. And I found it's easier if I lay the triangle down and then press the rope into it rather than trying to put the triangle on top of the rope. So I went through first and I wanted to lay all of my triangles in place before I added in my ribbons. And I left about 4 inches in between each of my triangles. Once all of my triangles were glued down, then I could go through and start adding my ribbons. I grabbed one of the orange ribbons and one of the sunflower ribbons, and I made sure that the sunflower was on top because I really wanted to see that more than the orange ribbon. I found the center of both of the ribbons, and then I laid that over my nautical rope so that the center was at the top of the nautical rope. I found it was easiest if I used a craft clip here just to keep those ribbons in place. And then I went through with a small piece of jute cord and I just tied the two ribbons together on the rope. Once I had that jute cord in place, I did go ahead and tug on the ribbons a bit because it helped tighten it up towards the nautical rope. I zoomed in a little so you can see here better. Once I found the center of those ribbons, like I said, I just laid it over that nautical rope, and then I used that craft clip to help hold it in place. And then I went through with the jute cord and I tied it as far up as I could. And whenever I pulled the jute cord tight, it cinched the ribbons together, and that fanned them out a little bit. But really what helped show the two ribbons off is when I went through and started tugging and separating all of them, and it made it look more like a tassel. Also keep in mind, I'm using sunflowers today, but this garland has such a simple base to it. This would be a great way to customize it to fit your home's decor. You don't have to use sunflowers. You could put anything you want on the little triangles, and then you could use any color or any pattern of ribbon for the little tassels in between. I really love adding simple garlands to my mantle or to my coffee bar, but I don't love the prices that retailers charge. I'm using up some of the pumpkin shapes that I have in my stash. This first set has a burlap background with a plaid front, and then I'm also going to use these plain wooden color your own ornaments that you can get at the Dollar Tree. I started by taking 3 of the pumpkins that had just the black and white plaid on the front. I think they're cute as is, but as an extra layer of embellishment, I'm just using some jute cord, tying a simple shoestring style bow and hot gluing it to the top of each of my pumpkins. To add a little color to my plain wood pumpkins, I'm using some Tim Holtz Distress ink in the color Rusty Hinge. I'm using an ink blending tool just to rub it around the edges. I wanted to leave the center plain so that it had a shadow effect and it kind of showed off the curve of the pumpkin more. Now every time I use these Tim Holtz inks in my videos, I always get a ton of questions about the little storage container that I have and also the ink blending tools that I use. So I'll make sure that I have all of those linked down below. You can get all of these things from Amazon. As a final decoration for my wooden pumpkins, I hot glued on some fall leaves that I had, and I also had these mini paper sunflowers that I thought made them look so cute. I cut a length of nautical rope that would fit across the top of my mantle. I took the 2 ends and I put them together so that I could find the center, and I'm working from the center out towards the end. So you can see here, I grabbed one of those black and white plaid pumpkins, and on the back side, I just laid a bead of hot glue, and then working from either side of that pumpkin, I just evenly spaced out my 2 wooden pumpkins. And I did it the same way. I just laid a bead of hot glue across the back and then laid the rope into it. And then that way I could tell if the spacing was even between the pumpkins. And then for the last 2 pumpkins, I did the same thing. I put hot glue on the back and spaced them out on either side. I'm letting the Dollar Tree do most of the work for me for my Halloween garland. They had these really cute felt shapes. I grabbed a pack of the black cats, and I also grabbed a pack of the jack-o'-lanterns. Now I'm not going to do anything to the jack-o'-lanterns. I think they're really cute how they are. You do have to pop the little pieces out so that you can see the face. And then for the cat, the only thing that I wanted to give my little kitty was a little bow tie. So I'm using some black and white ribbon that I already had in my stash. I cut one length down and then I dovetailed it on either end. I'm using a piece of black cording and I just accordion pleated the center of my ribbon, and I'm tying it with that black cording, and because I dovetailed the ends, once I had that knot in place in the center, it looked like a little bow tie for my black cat. Then I just used some hot glue to glue it to my cat, and the same thing that I did for my fall garland, I took a piece of jute rope, the length that I would need on my mantle. I folded it in half so that I could find the center, and starting in the center, I just worked my way out until I had all of my pieces on my garland. On a recent trip to Michael's near the front where the registers are, I found this pack of 16 wood rounds. They're mini sized and I immediately thought coasters. Right next to it happened to be some small wooden trays and there was a hexagon shaped one that the circles fit perfectly inside of. Apparently Michael's really wanted you to hang this tray up rather than use it on a surface because not only was there a sawtooth hanger on the back, there was also a rope hanger. I think that's overkill, but whatever. I was able to use a small screwdriver to remove that sawtooth hanger. And then for the rope hanger, I tried to get the staples out, but it just wasn't happening. So I just cut it as close as I could to the surface and it laid flat enough for me. Now these wood rounds are really thin and I thought they would be a little too thin to use as a coaster on their own. So I decided to double them up. I'm just using some hot glue here. You could also use wood glue if you'd like, but I'm just running a small amount of hot glue on one of them and then I'm lining a second one up with it and sandwiching them together. Whenever I make coasters, I always like to put some kind of protective backing on the bottom side of them. Sometimes I use those adhesive cork sheets from the Dollar Tree, but I was all out of those, so I just decided to use a piece of felt instead. Now for my coaster set, I'm going to do 5 coasters, and I was able to cut 5 circles out of one standard sheet of felt. I used a Sharpie to trace around one of those wood rounds to give me a guide, and then when I was cutting it out, I made sure that I stayed about 1/8 of an inch towards the inside of that marker line. That way there wouldn't be any marker showing on it and it would fit inside of my coaster. Now, one tip I have is felt can be really difficult to cut if you don't have a sharp pair of scissors. So make sure your scissors are really sharp and you'll have no problem cutting them out. Now, this is the bottom side of the coaster, so don't worry if your circle's a little wonky. I don't think anybody will see it. I put those felt circles to the side and I got to work on painting my coasters. Now, this wood's light enough you could put window clings right on top of it and it would show up, but I really wanted the colors on mine to be nice and vibrant. So I am giving each of them one coat of white chalk paint. Once my paint was dry, I used some hot glue to attach my felt circles to the bottom of my coasters. Now the felt that I used was pretty thick, so I'm only using one felt circle per coaster. But if you're using thinner felts, like the kind that you get from the Dollar Tree, you may want to think about doubling it up just so that hot glue doesn't seep through the back and it'll protect your surface a little bit more with 2 layers. I picked this set of window clings out for my coasters because on this pack there's a lot of smaller ones. They had some smaller pumpkins and sunflowers and leaves, and since I'm working with such a small surface, I knew I would be able to fit and layer these on each of my coasters. Now this is the fun part. I just started peeling off all of those smaller ones and laying them down on my coasters. And once I had them arranged how I liked them, I took a picture of all of them with my phone so that I could reference it while I was sticking everything in place. I'm using Mod Podge with a foam brush on the back side of my window clings to attach them to my coasters. And like I said, I had that picture on my phone, so I was able to reference it every time I pulled all of my window clings off. Because I think on these coasters, there was only one that actually only had one window cling. The rest of them, I kind of layered several of the smaller window clings together. After I had all of the window clings in place with the Mod Podge on the back side, then I went through and I did give the surface of my coasters 2 coats of the Mod Podge, and I made sure that it dried really well in between. And that's just to help protect it from any beverages you're going to put on it, and it'll protect it from the heat of any hot drinks that you might be using too. I got lucky with this set of window clings. There was this really cute one that had a saying on it, and it fit almost perfectly inside of this hexagon tray. I just had to cut off some of the clear border that was around it. And for the tray, I decided to leave this the natural wood color because this is just going to be on the inside. It's just going to be a small detail that you'll only see whenever you pull all of the coasters out. So you can see here, once I had some of that clear border trimmed off, it fit really perfect inside of this tray. And again, I just used the Mod Podge to attach that to the bottom. To give a little embellishment to my tray, I'm using some orange ribbon that I got at the Dollar Tree this year. I really like this. It has a burlap feel and it has just a touch of gold on the edges. Now this ribbon's a little bit thinner, so rather than running hot glue through the center where I'm gluing down the ribbon, you can see here I'm just putting hot glue at every corner of this hexagon tray. That way you wouldn't see the hot glue seeping through the ribbon. And I also want to mention, keep this craft in mind because Christmas is right around the corner, and I think this would make a really sweet gift for somebody, is a cute little coaster set with its own tray. I've used these car wash cloths quite a bit in the past when I've been crafting. You can always find these in the automotive section of the Dollar Tree. So I wanted to create a stuffed snowman using these cloths. In addition to those, I'm going to be using some baker's twine and a few things just to create a pattern. I taped 2 pieces of cardstock together to make it longer so that I could make a bigger snowman. I'm using a burner cover from the Dollar Tree and also a small plastic plate to create the shape of the snowman that I wanted. You could look around your house, find anything in your craft room or, from your kitchen if you have some dinner plates, just anything that you have that you can create a snowman shape in the size that you want. I want to hand stitch my 2 snowmen together, so I laid one of my car wash cloths down and I laid the other one on top of it. And I put my pattern down and I'm just using a Sharpie here and I'm tracing around my snowman pattern. Before I started cutting out my snowman, I took some straight pins and I just put a few pins in around the edges just to hold the 2 pieces together so that it would be easier to cut out. Now I'm using some pretty sharp fabric scissors here, so I was able to cut around the snowman in both layers. If you don't have scissors that are quite sharp enough, just trace your pattern on each cloth and cut them out separately. Since I'm stitching these together, it didn't matter if they were exactly even. I was just trying to save a little time by cutting them both out at once. Now, like I said, I'm hand stitching these 2 together because I really wanted it to have that rustic handmade look. So I'm using some baker's twine here that's in a white and sort of khaki colored stripe. You could use anything you want here if you wanted to use yarn or jute cord. If you didn't want to hand stitch this at all, you could glue the edges together or you could just run it through a sewing machine. The needle I'm using is actually a needle that you would use for plastic canvas. It doesn't have a sharp point on it because the weave of the car wash cloth is big enough that you can fit a needle like this down through it. I'm trying to zoom in here and show you what type of stitch I'm doing. I don't know if there's a name for this stitch. I'm just going down through the top and then coming through and going through that same hole again. And then I move over about a 1/2 inch and it just creates a stitched border the whole way around. Once I had it all completed, I left a few inches open on the one side so that I could stuff my snowman. Normally I would use some pillow stuffing here, but since I had all of this excess from the 2 car wash cloths left over, I figured I would just cut those into small squares, and that's what I'm going to use to stuff my snowman. I got a pretty good sized pile of squares from the scraps on those car wash cloths, and it worked out really well. It was the exact amount that I needed to stuff my snowman. I just made sure as I was pushing them in that I was really getting to the edges all through the head and the body of the snowman. Once I had it filled up with all of those scraps, then I went through and just stitched closed the hole that I had left for stuffing. Now my favorite part is the decorating. I'm using this on a shelf in my coffee bar area, but the car wash cloths are big enough. You could make this almost double the size that I did and actually use it as a pillow if you'd like. But since I'm going to put mine on a shelf, I wanted to accessorize mine and use some things that are a little bit harder. They wouldn't be good for a pillow. So I started with some burlap ribbon. I like this ribbon because it has some gold trim on it, and I tied it around my snowman in place of a scarf. Then I'm using some of the berry bead garland that I got from the Dollar Tree, and I'm just laying that on top of the bow along with some greenery and a wooden snowflake. You can decorate yours however you'd like. And like I said, if you want to actually use this as a pillow, I would probably use softer things for decorating, like maybe a piece of fleece for the scarf, or add a little hat to the top of it, anything that's nice and soft and cuddly. But like I said, since mine is just decoration, I didn't mind that there were some pieces on it that were not so cuddly. I'm using felt to create the eyes and the nose for my snowman. I took a piece of black felt and I'm just using a quarter, and I'm cutting two pieces out at the same time. I felt like the quarter was the right size for the eyes that I would need. And then I also had this burnt orange felt in my stash. It looks a little more brown on camera, but I just cut out a simple long triangle shape, and that was going to be my nose. I used some hot glue to attach these to my snowman pillow, and when I hot glued down my nose, I only added hot glue to the one side so that it would lift up a little bit and give it more dimension. And I also forgot to film, but I did hot glue two buttons to the front of my snowman as well. Thanks so much for coming to hang out with me again in the craft room. I hope you had a fantastic 2024, and I look forward to 2025. All right, everyone, have a great week, and I'll talk to you in the next one.